Welcome, everyone, to our monthly mastermind from Recruiting Insight. Before I get started, I want to announce we're going to do a special edition of our mastermind next Wednesday with Coach Travis Robertson on the NAR transition, and he has a number of things that could help all of us, including our agents. We will be recording it. I know it's short notices, but next Wednesday, 9 Pacific, 11 Central, same time, I'll be putting the links in the chat bar, and we'll be communicating that as well. But a special edition next Wednesday with my good friend, Coach Travis Robertson. But today is my good friend, Dr. Bill. Bill is called the Team Doctor. Dr. Bill, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be with you all and to actually see people's faces. That is always good. So I'm going to catch you if you're multitasking. No, I am wearing pants today, so that is a good thing. It's great to be with you all.
And, you know, we have folks from all over the U.S., a few from Canada. We may have, I haven't looked at, a couple from Mexico or Europe, and maybe one from Australia. We'll see. But we have folks from all over. Maybe drop into the chat bar where you're zooming in from and give Dr. Bill and us a little view of where everyone's joining from. While we're doing that, Dr. Bill, tell us a little bit about you and the book, Fire Your Excuses. Give us a little overview of why the audience here of CEOs and leaders and recruiters and people trying to grow their company should even want to listen into you.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking at people coming in. I see some friends from Canada. We're English by way of Prince Edward Island, but I grew up in Boston, and I see some Boston people, lived in the same town, grew up in the same town area as Dunkin' Donuts, but I spent most of my life in California. I now live in Phoenix with my family, but I go back and forth to California a lot, and I was just back there yesterday. So good to be with you. Now, my buddy Marcus Dayhoff and I wrote the book a number of years ago because we saw that there was a need for people to look at their mindset, and this was really before a lot of the mindset started to kick in. But also this idea, because we're psychologists by background, that we started doing a lot of executive coaching, and we found that there was a lot of psychology to just whether we pursue our goals or not. And that's not something the typical coach really understands or talks about very much. So I've got a few key things that I think are more relevant to your industry that I wanted to discuss with Mark, and I think you might find it illuminating. But I know for me, there's just parts of RAM that get tied up. There are old tapes, there's limits, and a lot of other authors have talked about some of those things. But it's just kind of fascinating that the best psychology, the best coaching translates so well to our plateaus or our breakthroughs in our business. So I hope you'll find that relevant. I've got some pro tips for you, and I'm happy to jump in and we can start a conversation, Mark.
Yeah, I love it. And of course, as always, we'll have the recording, and I know Dr. Bill has some slides that we'll share with everyone afterwards. Well, first of all, Fire Your Excuses. I just love the name of the book. But what prompted you to write it, and maybe give us just a quick, what they would get out of reading it?
I think I would say, like many of you, if you've ever achieved a certain level of success and it just felt like you were stalled out, my buddy and I just started to look at what has happened in our life, what are our best practices. We came up with 8 areas where people tend to get stuck, and they're all integrative. I don't think every single area is necessarily relevant for our conversation today, but I wanted to focus on the areas that were the 3 areas. But that's really the impetus for us. We saw it in our own lives, in our own health, and our own career. Yeah. We started to realize there's some psychology to this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, over today's session, we're going to cover 3 pro tips. One is getting more connected, 2, upping our communication skills, and 3, the concept of a weekly personal meeting, which I personally do. I use the planner, high performance planner from Brendan Pritchard. That has a day prep meeting and then a weekly personal meeting. But all of these relate to the recruiting function, the talent attraction function. The first one, really getting more connected. We teach on building a network of influence who are in a position to help us grow. Like you and I get together every once in a while.
Yes,
how can we help each other? So what do you think the audience listening in today are the biggest keys to firing your excuses?
Well, I do think this idea of connections are fundamental. My research for my PhD that got me so involved in speaking was on burnout. And as we started to look at some of the research, the landmark study out of UCLA says something really interesting, that we need 3 to 4 connections a week just to stay at the top of our game emotionally. Maybe you are not somebody that is going to struggle with diagnosable depression, but all of us seem to lack that. There's very few Americans. Now, I've spent a lot of time in Africa. They have different challenges, and there's many different cultures and countries there, but they don't struggle with this idea of isolation as much. And as we know, as a person that's self-motivated, trying to lead a team, it is so easy to not even recognize that, like the terrible metaphor, the frog in the kettle, we're just a little bit off, we're a little disconnected, and we need some of those key people with whom we can have authentic communication with. And my wife is a great therapist. I'm a therapist to her, but if we're our only therapist, it just gets weird. So I'm not trying to say, go get therapy. I'm just saying you need stereo effect. You need to make sure that you are not disconnected, because it's so subtle, it changes your mindset, and you don't even realize what it's doing for you.
So it seems so like counterintuitive. We're in a society of, we're
Yeah.
connected on Zoom, we're connected by phone, we have people all around us, yet even the agents I'm talking to feel isolated.
Yes. And, as frankly, as we're talking, Mark, I'm kind of on. I'm in my professional role. I'm not going to share at the level probably with all of you that I would with my good friend or Mark and I over coffee. I wouldn't do that. We need that. And then we also need to do that professionally too. We can weave that in. It's just so fundamental. So that's one of the things with my meetings that I say is, who am I connecting with? So any RAM that is tied up in my business is observable and fixable and potentially releasable.
Yeah. Which you and I recently just did in Irvine. We
Yes,
had a
yeah,
coffee
and I
meeting.
did that on purpose.
Yep.
I said,
With-
it's an isolated trip, but
Yeah.
I want to connect with my friends and colleagues
Yeah.
instead of just go make some money and be away from everybody.
Now, you mentioned in the book that there is an offensive and defensive component to success,
Yes.
like sports, offense and defense. Tell us more how this relates to not only all of maybe our career success, but those that we're also coaching and trying to recruit and retain into our offices, how we can help them be successful.
Yes, it's interesting. Many people have said that when we get stressed out or we are a little bit frightened, maybe unconsciously, we start to do those behaviors that are very comforting. Suddenly we can't move forward until our website is perfect or until we have a new file cabinet or new table. And so there are things both in office setup, of course, and our health and self-care and taxes and all those things that have to be dialed in. That's our defense. They have to be. But the mind is wily. And when we are forced with the challenge of going beyond a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, those defensive strategies start calling our name. And there's people that are just very dialed in with all that. They have the perfect setup, they have the perfect documentation, CRM, all that. But there's not that go out and slay the dragon. There's not that offense. There's other people that are all offense, and their personal life and their organizational situation's a mess. If they're smart, they have somebody helping them or a whole team. But we need offense and defense. And at the end, I'll tell you, we have a free assessment you can take that actually in part measures your offense versus defensive ratio, because you need both. But it's interesting how you can either skew to one or the other. Those that struggle with substance abuse sometimes continue to have a strong offense, even though their defense is a mess. Those who are stymied and stuck and scared tend to really double down on, I've got to get that newsletter out, and instead of making some phone calls. It's really interesting, the psychology of it for me.
Oh, interesting. Now, if I take this assessment and I find I'm skewed heavily towards one or the other, is the assessment going to help me with some practical?
There are some suggestions. There's different levels, like low, average, and et cetera. And the test actually will give you a blurb of, here's some things you can do based on your score for that particular scale. So it's relatively sophisticated.
Well, let's talk a little bit about mindset. We have an audience here that is, these are the top executives, top recruiters, very, very successful folks, but all of us can work on our mindset, including those that we're trying to attract into our firm. But how does mindset relate to firing your excuses or firing our excuses?
Well, I feel like the higher you rise, the more influence you have, and the more important it is to be acutely aware of your mindset.
Mm,
Just like we say, in some ways, life is about waking up. We ought to be more awake in our 40s than we were our 30s, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, I might say, even at my age, that there are probably locked doors and mindsets that limit me that I'm not even aware of. It's still the unconscious iceberg out there. And as much as I want to think I'm self-aware because of what I do and the companies I've worked with, et cetera, I know that there are things that I have been told even this last year that I didn't realize I've been doing them my whole life. So mindset is just so critical the higher you rise, because you can direct and influence, for better for worse, so many people that you support.
mhm.
And this is why we'll talk a little bit about our meetings, because that is part of it. And there's some other things we can do to work on mindset if we want to talk about those too.
Okay. Um, you've mentioned a couple times this morning, I would call it mood management, or,
Yes, yes.
you know, how do we maintain or boost our energy levels to stay motivated on the recruiting tasks, on the operational task, on whatever task we have in hand, or motivating others to also do the same.
Well, let me give you an example that I don't want you necessarily to try, but it kind of illustrates our point. And that is, there's some places where they actually have people flip on their camera and somebody remotely is working at their desk. And just knowing that somebody is right there on camera with you doing what they need to do makes a difference. And I call that the library effect. You remember going to school and just studying with a friend or somebody you love, and you had a little break for coffee, or maybe if it was somebody you're dating, a kiss every hour, but you had no communication in between. There was something about that accountability, and it is hugely important to have that built in. Another thing that is huge is to know that other people are doing what you're struggling to do. And the more you start your day and stew and saute yourself with the best ideas and the best practices, and we can talk more about that if you like, the better you're going to do. So
Yeah.
starting my day is huge. And we know that 90% of the news out there, left, right, or center, is negative. I'm a news hound. I have to really slow my roll and say, what is getting into my head? Who am I listening to? And as we talked a little bit before, is we want to be focused in on the top 10% of your field or whatever field you're in. The top 10% are knocking it out of the park. What are they saying? What are they writing? How are they speaking? Where can I go meet them? What kind of podcasts can I listen to? Doing things like this is a huge part of the start of my day.
Well, one of them ties right into what Ben and I have been talking. It's the Hawthorne effect, and we have a
Yes,
weekly
yes.
tag. We have the appointment game meeting every week. I'm looking at a few of you that need to be showing up more often. Where we're actually, Bill, we're on video like this, making the calls.
That's what I'm talking about. It
Yeah,
makes
we're
a
all
huge difference. It really
yeah,
does.
we mute, we do the calls. Then
Mhm.
at the end, we debrief and share best
I love it. I
practices.
love it. I
And
wasn't
that's,
sure if I wanted to push that, but you know what? If you're already doing it, you're well ahead. And the Hawthorne effect from California, I know that well.
yeah.
But yes, just knowing somebody's doing the hard lifting just like you are makes a huge difference. And then you look back and you realize, wow, I'm in another whole level. I've got a cadre of people. It feels like I might be the middle of the pack or pulling up the rear, but compared to the average person in my space, I'm way beyond them because I've created a new peer group.
Yeah. So as I'm looking at a few of those that if you're not participating, we're going to challenge you to participate. If you've never heard of it and want to know more about it, reach out to Ben and I, and we'll share with you what these weekly the appointment game groups are all about for either you or your recruiters.
I love it.
Um, you mention in your book, Bill, Dr. Bill, that communication issues can be one of our excuses.
Yes.
Uh, what's the best formula, the advice you can provide for communicating our message, not only to our team, but to the potential people that we want to attract to our firm?
I do believe, and this may not be rocket science, but I believe in the power of very short but well-crafted storytelling. But storytelling that, as Donald Miller would say, and he has, I think, the storybook brand. If you look up Donald Miller, it's just profound stuff. But he just makes the obvious point that I think is missed with a lot of really competent people, and that is that you're not the hero of your business. You're not the hero of your own story. Uh, make sure you demote yourself to not being the hero. Your clients are. And you can talk a lot about how your clients are knocking it out of the park. He says instead, position yourself as two things: as a guide, and every great story has the guide that comes in right at the most important time when the hero's struggling, maybe full of foibles. And then you're also an authority. So check out his book. It's just powerful. And so there's a study where they talked about the auto industry in the US struggling, and they said, we've got to up our performance, and we're lagging in comparison to the Japanese by 40%. Nobody listened. They sent over a group. The Japanese were very gracious because they knew the secret sauce wasn't production, it was culture. And they showed up at night and they were even working harder. And then they were deputized. They went back to Michigan and they said, hey, we've seen, it's real. And they experimented with different lengths of story, but then the story started to change hearts and minds. And so a powerful story is one key thing where you're not the hero, but the kids that have survived cancer at the pediatric hospital are our heroes. We're just the doctors and nurses and staff that have helped them get there. Are you falling into beating your chest and telling people how great you are? The other thing I would say, and I may be breaking my rule right now, and that is the 3-minute rule. When somebody asks you how you're doing, how your business is, speak for 3 minutes and then say, or less, often less, and then say nothing. And if people don't say, please tell me more about your vacation to Vegas last summer, newsflash, Uncle Jim, they don't care. Your family doesn't care, you know? And so always be short unless you're doing a presentation, right? Always be short. Let people ask you more. So many really smart people are the hero and talk too long.
You know, Dr. Bill, one of the things that Ben and I have on our recruiting curriculum is really the 80-20 rule, where we teach them to speak 20%, get the other person to speak 80% of the time, right?
Excellent.
Now, a couple of the people are asking, could you mention the name of the book you just mentioned again?
I think it's the Storybook brand, but I may actually even have it there.
Yeah, I think it is the Storybook brand.
The Storybook brand, Donald Miller. Now, there's a great other Miller author, Dan Miller, who just passed away. Donald Miller wrote, I think, Blue Like Jazz, and he's really an author extraordinaire, but he has templates to help you craft how you message based on his storybook format. Yep. But I think we leave a lot on the table by not understanding these principles, and we naturally want to show that we're good at what we do, but our websites and our marketing and our messaging can really be more about us than about the people that we're so proud of.
Right. Telling a better story about the heroes of the story, and the heroes of the story aren't us. They're the clients, the agents we serve, kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I've got a bunch more questions. You talked a lot about getting more connected, and we call it influencers, building our influencer network, connected, whatever word we want to use. Tell us about, one, how to do that, and two, why it's so important to grow our connections.
Yeah, there's personal and professional. We moved to Phoenix a 1.5 years ago, and it's been essential for us to establish new connections here based on being in California for 39 years. Mm-hmm. And so that 3 or 4 contacts a week becomes so essential. And, frankly, a lot of it on the run does become virtual like this, but anytime when Mark and I or my other buddies can see each other 3-dimensionally, face to face, it's just huge. I also kind of joke around as I start by, maybe like many of you, being a stalker in a professional sense, watching people's YouTube videos and content, maybe not joining up with them yet. And then eventually, as we see they have value for us, become more and more a part of it. And then there's a point, and this is not a commercial for me, it's just what has happened for me is I am the freebie king, but eventually there is a pay to play. Right. And Brian Tracy talks about 3% of our income in our personal and career development. And for many years, I did not do that. I just read voraciously. I watched voraciously. I went to a lot of different things, but I didn't really invest in more. And as I did see my income and my business increase exponentially. There were some false starts. There were some people that maybe were not as helpful as possible, but very few can I say that they really lost me money. And so just by starting with books and podcasts and freebies and all that, and then eventually saying, who are the mentors that I need to maybe pay to be around the best people possible? And maybe many of you have done that for years, but that began to really change things for me. In the last 5 years, I've had more growth in my business than the first 25. And
Wow.
so that's pretty, exciting to say, here I am in my career that things are blowing up. And
Yeah.
yet the one thing I see is I'm connecting more with those folks.
One of my top producers I had in Texas religiously spent 1% of his income on self-development.
There you go. I think
Just,
that's critical.
he just had a formula.
And if
Now,
I could just add this, Mark, I always joke two things. What if you gave up one of those vacations that you have planned this year to do that? I guarantee you, most likely you would take better vacations for the rest of your life. And
mm,
another tease, and this is where I get never invited back. You can go anywhere in the world you want to go if you, for 3 years, probably pull your subscriptions and your television watching. You add up that math anywhere on the planet. You say, oh, I wish I could go to Tahiti. Those folks are so great. I wish I could. Well, you can go anywhere you want if you just redirect, spend that time learning instead of maybe streaming, and you will be shocked. So I'm never going to be invited to speak to the streaming companies of Hollywood, but I think that's a good tip. And by the way, Mark, that's how we wrote our book. We pulled our cable and our streaming, my buddy and I, for 2 years. It took us 4 years to write it.
oh, so you self-funded it. Okay.
Yeah, and after, we did. The whole thing was self-funded. And after we were done, I went to Europe for 2 weeks because I had a lot of extra. So there you go.
Oh, there you go. Well, so in our industry, there's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of uncertainty. In some markets, the market seems stalled. In some, there's growth. But if I had to describe it, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of turmoil. When the market is stalled or there's fear, what alternative approaches can each of us take as leaders, as recruiters, to engage our potential recruits?
Well, a couple things. First, the principle is I always like the phrase make use of the chaos, make use of the confusion. Whenever there's confusion, there's opportunity. And I love that. When people are running around with their hair on fire, I can be the person that isn't. So I'm guessing many of you on this call are trend watchers. That comes with voracious reading and streaming and educating yourself. And then you start really hearing the pain points of other people. And whether you're talking about an individual buyer or the market as a whole, once you've identified the top 2 or 3 pain points, you can then begin to address them. And if everybody's running right, you run left. If everybody's saying this, you say that. The contrarian message is a powerful message that stands out in a sea of marketing. And so, other people have written books on the blue ocean strategy years ago, where one part of the ocean is filled with fish and shark, and then you cast your net, if you will, to use a biblical metaphor, on the other side of the boat, and it's open water. You have an opportunity. So one last thing I see about that, and this is based on the marketing of Rise and Trite, is that there's usually only 3 or 4 people in any main area that can take most of the business. Think about soft drinks, think about fast food. You don't want to be 50th or 1,000th to that market. You want to say, could I just turn it on its head a little bit and be the Uncola and start my own category?
Yeah. What about, Bill, certain people, it's hard to engage them even to communicate their pain points.
Yes.
With is there a way?
Yeah.
Is there a way to self-activate folks who are consciously or unconsciously resistant to sharing their pain points because they're afraid you're going to sell them something?
I would say if if you've done your research, you can make a pretty fair guess at what most people's pain points are, even if they don't share them with you. And so what I try to do in those situations is get permission to share in non-intrusive ways and speak to those points. And I was reminded the other day of just the sheer number of contacts most people need to go from just kicking the tires, somewhat interested, to even being somebody that would return your call, your email, what you might want to do to reach out. There are many people in the ether out there that are watching what you are sharing, but you will never know. And so when I do get on a call, by the way, here's a trick for me that just helped to win me a couple of very big contracts. Is when I hear the pain points, I just get to writing, and I write an article based on that person's pain points. And then I send them an email and say, hey, by the way, I was motivated by what we said, and I just created an article. I just wrote an article that I put on LinkedIn, or I put here. You might be interested. And it's exactly addressing what they're interested in. And I don't care if anybody else on LinkedIn reads it. This is for an audience of one to close a deal. And it takes me about an hour to do it. Other people can see it, but I am speaking to their pain points, and they are not offended. And it's another point of contact for them. But I ask permission. Hey, if every X number of bit, can I send you something? Nobody says no. And it begins to kind of show them that you might be somebody they could work with.
So Bill, this was a strategy you and I talked about when I was in Texas for a while. So I wrote a weekly blog about a different pain point.
There you go.
For agents. We know what they are. They don't have a database. If they have a database, they don't know how to maintain it or contact the database. And we just picked about 15 different pain points. We'd write them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then as people came up, and then I could send them, well, I was just thinking about you and this particular.
Exactly.
And it can work. Now, many of you may not be writers or have that desire, but the content is out there. I think that's a powerful strategy.
It's not the great American novel. It's just, hey, you're struggling. Here's some things that work. Here's a list, opening and close. And by the way, and that's what I did with a contract for nurse bullying. Had a connection with the hospital, wrote the article, sent it, and I just landed the biggest career of my life based on that. I was stunned, but they just needed a little push to say, this guy knows what he's doing. It took me about an hour to write the article, and now I can send it out to other hospitals because I know that's an issue.
Well, so here's going to be the crux of the whole call.
Yeah.
Because we all have excuses. How can I reframe? How can we reframe? How can we help our staff and recruiters reframe? I'm too busy to make the calls today, or whatever action we have on our to-do list. I'm too busy to fill in the blank, into a proactive commitment to prioritize recruitment in my schedule.
That's a challenging one. And we can be so tied up with the busyness. Usually if I talk to myself, my wife who runs a company, or one of my clients, I see that, just like was it Boyle's law, the time you have expands into the events you have expanded to the time. And if we're avoidant, if we're on that defense, what needs to happen, these things need to happen, you can easily convince yourself there's no time whatsoever. But it is just like the example here. I have these little push-up helpers. How long does it take to do a set of push-ups? To not do any exercise at all. In between a webinar, I could do a set of push-ups. I could do planking. There's 1,000 things. So I'm not really buying it. And I always say, do a 2-week time log. And if you don't have 15 minutes here and there that you could use, I always say, I'll buy you a Starbucks, because it's so easy when you really honestly do a time log from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed for 2 weeks. You will see major areas where you're just fudging. And I would say you're busted, I'm busted. And again, you may not have a lot of time, but I could definitely find some time, and you probably could too. Do a time log, just like you do a spending log. You'll be shocked.
The first time I had a coach had me do a time log, they had me do it in hour increments.
Yes.
And that was fairly benign.
Yeah.
But then the next time they did it in 15-minute increments.
Yeah, that's where you see the magic.
And I was resistant, like, oh, this is anyway, but I did it. And I'm so glad I did, because it really very enlightening. And then only, a week or 2 weeks, you really start to see the holes in your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And the hour was good, but the 15-minute increment was brutal, but it was also very eye-opening.
Well, my wife and I did that about a year ago. And we saw our biggest gain was It was in the food preparation, eating, and cleanup time.
Mm.
We said, just a little shift with healthier, more pre-made meals for a couple of those nights. We ended up getting a quick 2.5 hours back in our schedule. And what if an hour or two went to making calls?
Yeah.
But it would just jumped out at us. We're spending way too much time with the whole food thing. And how do we do it healthy? And we were able to figure it out. It was so obvious once we did the time lock.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple other techniques in your book for time management. Um, what are some of the
Yes.
best
Well,
strategies?
you mentioned this, and I'd like to parse out that what I call the weekly personal business meeting. And maybe if you have me
Mm.
back, we'll talk more about that. But I've created that, and eventually it may be a book and a binder, but right now it's become something that I say is my secret weapon. You see behind me, I say I'm in Phoenix, and I am, but I spent a lot of time in Corona del Mar and Newport Beach, where I lived in that area for many, many years. And we met a lot of great people that did well, and a lot of hospital folks and entrepreneurs, and those that made, say, 10 million or above, the Deca millionaires. Almost every single person I had a pleasure meeting, they all had some type of weekly personal business meeting. Again, the higher you rise, the more you need that. And that's different than planning your calendar. That's more of thinking about your big goals. Of course, you have them, your yearly goals. Of course, you check in with them. It's the time that I've made the big pivots and the time that I've often decided to start a new part of my company or to write another book or to make a huge shift. I'm just, as we say, too close to it. The scheduling helps me to make sure I hit all my marks for other people. My weekly personal business meeting makes sure that I am, seeing things at 30,000 feet. And so I sneak away to 5-star hotels. I crash the lobby. I get either a drink or a coffee, and I look like I'm there. I just need to get away. I've got a nice office, but it's just too similar. I need to get away somewhere where I can not be found. And my best times and my most productive moments are these weekly personal business meetings. So about a half hour to an hour once every week, or at least every other week. Every quarter, do a morning and say, or do a day, say, maybe once a week, once a month, do a morning, every quarter, do a day, and then have 1 or 2 summit days a year with you, your loved one, your team. That's, I think, magic. And that just helps me so much. And that's where I drop things. That's where I pick up new things.
Oh, well, and if you want to check out the Brendan Pritchard High
Yes,
Performance
he's got a
Planner,
great system.
it
Yes,
gives you a template
there you go. Yep.
that a mini version daily, a bigger version weekly, and then the well, great. Well, and we're going to open this up for questions. If you have questions, drop those into the chat bar. But I think we were going to cover getting more connected, upping our communication skills, and this concept of the weekly personal business meeting. What could we all do in the recruiting function and the talent attraction function, in just as leaders, to up our communication skills?
Well, another thing that you can do, and this is very simple, but it has a profound shift on how you're perceived, and that is never miss an emotion. You don't have to complete full sentences. You don't have to have incredible truth bombs to drop. But when somebody mentions an emotional moment, you tag it, you acknowledge it. If I say I was just in California, I say I went to Disneyland, I say I mentioned on the 5 freeway there was a horrible accident. You're not going to ask me about Magic Mountain. You're not going to ask me about Mickey. You're going to say horrible accident. Were you okay? What happened? They're throwing something out to you. And people that don't catch people's emotions are seen as tone deaf, and they're seen as unsafe. There are people that are rah-rah. Some of you are incredibly inspirational to your team, and that is essential. But you would hope that they would see you as just as real as you are one setting, and that is rah, rah, rah. And so it doesn't take a lot of time. It's not a huge delay of game, but I would say skip it at your own peril. I think that's a huge thing.
It's really relevant. Ben wrote a white paper called the Simple Psychology of Recruiting, and part of the concept is people quickly determine, can I trust you and can I respect you, before they even acknowledge this person is competent, right?
Yes.
And I think this speaks to this never miss an emotion point, because that's where you build trust and respect, right?
Yes, and I would say in our personal life and maybe professionally, I sometimes have a little game with myself, and that is how long can I go in this conversation with somebody new, or maybe not new, without telling them anything of what I do? I knew a friend that had a party in LA, and he said, check your labels at the door. Don't want to hear where you live, don't want to hear where your vacation, don't want to hear your job. You're not allowed to say that. You're just going to connect with people humanly. And that
Yeah.
was hard for people because people want to say they want to figure out what neighborhood do you live in. They'll even try to figure out what car do you drive? How moneyed are you? Instead of
Yeah.
talking about the other person. I
Yeah.
love the phrase, hey, tell me everything. Or I've got plenty of time. I've got 10
Yeah.
minutes. I'm all yours. I'll give them a parameter. I'll give them a limit. And then I'll just drop everything, put my phone away and give them my contact. And most people just need a 5 or 10 minute completely all there for you moment rather than a half hour of you taking calls and interruptions.
I learned this. One of the organizations I'm part of has a twice a year meeting, primarily of CEO level type people,
Mhm.
but their charity is homeless. And
Oh,
so they
wow. Yeah.
insert homeless people into this session. They buy them clothes and get them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you could be in a small group having a discussion, and the person to your left is a CEO, and the person to your right is a
I
homeless
love it.
person.
I
But you
love it.
won't, because all you can have is your name, no
Yes.
title, no company, and that's all off limits. And
That's incredible.
it's been wild for me. Yeah, it's been crazy. So Corey's asking,
Yeah, Corey.
and I know there's others like this. How does an introvert fire their anxiety excuses around having conversations with either
Mm.
strangers or, just people they don't know?
Yes, I would say, and it's not easy, but I would say the best answer is that your questions do the work for you. Just like a coach versus a mentor. A coach doesn't have to have all the answers, but they can curate some very good questions. And I've seen people that are total strangers just melt when you do say things like, tell me everything or tell me more. They say that's the best three phrases, three words you can ever use. And so you don't have to do a lot of talking. Many times people just talk, and you're just prompting them and giving them some rephrasing what they're saying. And that's something that introverts can do. Now they may need to refuel later, right? They may need some time to be alone, but it's amazing how many people really do want and need to talk. And with very little provocation, they will tell you their story.
Yeah, that's great. And in our white paper, the Simple Psychology of Recruiting, we have a chapter about self-actualization and thoughtful business questions. If you're looking for a list of thoughtful business questions, if you're one of our clients, you probably have that list. And if you're not and would like it, reach out to Ben and I after the webinar, and we'll get you the list of thoughtful business questions, Corey, that can help activate the conversation. And then they do all the talking.
And Mark, if I can give you just as a bonus, and I stole this off the internet years ago, my favorite coaching and consulting question that people always love. It's toward the end, or even not toward the end, middle of any short or long conversation. Hey, we've been talking about this. What should we be talking about? What aren't we talking about that we should? If I knew you
Mhm.
better, I was sharper. And people will literally say, that's a great question. I didn't think about
Yeah.
it. But you never walk away feeling like you've done your download and your little dog and pony about what you want, but haven't addressed their needs. What should we be talking about that we're not?
Yeah.
People appreciate that. And again, it's just something you can find those type of great questions. Mark has a list. Questions do the work for you.
Yeah. I like that. Questions do the work for you. I did that the other day. I said, well, what should I be asking that I'm not?
There you go.
And
It's
then
just
they came out with,
high up and
oh,
above. Yeah.
yeah, they came, well, why didn't you ask me about blah, 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 or whatever?
Yeah.
And like I would have never,
They give you the answers to the test and then they thank you for being so sharp that you get an A, but they just gave you the cheat sheet. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's a win all around.
yeah. Okay, so as we kind of wrap up, getting more connected, upping our communication skills, and this concept of the weekly personal business meeting were three big things I took away. Anything else in terms of firing our excuses for ourselves, for our staff, for our recruiting teams, for our agents?
It is a challenge. The more you succeed in your business, the more this is a challenge, and that is your identity gets totally wrapped up in your productivity. Somebody says, we're human beings, not human doings, but we do see that there's a lot of grading that we do based on how much money, how many clients, meeting quota, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like that is a very dangerous thing. And I'm always walking that back and forth of fully investing in my business, but also saying, hey, I come from a spiritual background. I have that. I have some charities that I'm really have a heart for. I have a dear son and a lovely wife. The day we got married 10 years ago, she just wasn't paying attention. I caught her at a weak moment. And I just don't want to be a walking productive person. And so to be able to say that when I do my work in those areas, it doesn't mean so much that it becomes neurotic and frill and anxiety laden to succeed or have a setback. I have a firm foundation. And so whether you can tap into your faith or your friends or your family, it's just so important because after a while, you start to get student sauteed in your identity, and it becomes pretty obvious that you get nothing else going on.
Mhm.
And that will translate more than you ever imagine when you're talking to people too.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a slide on how to take the free
Yeah.
assessment if they'd like, and how to obtain the book. Why don't we put that up?
Yeah, let's see if we can show you. I've got a couple things that if you want a little bit more, let's just pull this in here. This is a slide. You could take a screenshot. We will probably make this available to you, but there's a QR code. It's just essentially at fireyourexcuses.com. You'll see a place to do that. This QR code just takes you there. Sometimes I'll just take a screenshot. You can benchmark how you are with others. I took a practice one again yesterday. There's a little trouble with downloading the PDF, but you can either print your results or save the HTML. It gives you the option, but you may have a little glitch when it comes to saving the PDF of the report, but you can definitely save it that way. But it's a really nice free baseline that covers all aspects of Fire Your Excuses. And if you're interested in the book itself, the cheapest place I found to find a fresh copy is our site. I think we have it for $14.99. You can get some used here and there, but it's just Fire Excuses for your /store. And if you have any interest in connecting with me, there's my contact information. But I've just really enjoyed being with you all. And I look forward to maybe talking again sometime soon. And it's just always a pleasure, Mark, whenever we get to partner together. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer. I know we're just about at our time, but thanks for listening. And I hope this is a little bit of a different perspective, bringing in some of the psychology and the unconscious to what we do.
Well, what we wanted to do is tee us all up as we enter into the second quarter to fire our excuses. We all
There
have
you
them.
go.
I have them, and tee us up for not only ourselves but our teams and our folks that we're trying to attract into our firm. Take the assessment if you all. It's pretty cool. I've done it. It's really cool. Any questions for Dr. Bill as we wrap up the session here? Thoughts, comments? Was this helpful? How do we help agents who are suffering from fear? How do we help ourselves in fear? Right now in our industry, Bill, I don't know if I filled you in, but there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things in motion that we don't have the answers to yet.
Mm-hmm.
And there is fear in our ranks. And how do we deal with that?
Well, I do feel like fear is contagious, and so is courage. And so saying, who are those folks that don't seem to be running around with their hair on fire? And it's not just because they have so much they couldn't care less what's happening in the market or our space. There are people that have had some challenges, but they seem to have a poise and they seem to have a calmness. And those are people I want to be around, not just people that are so loaded that they couldn't care less. There are people that are like me that I respect, and that's where that social connection is huge. Sometimes it is talking to a therapist. Sometimes it is starting your day with a mantra or scripture to help you get your head on straight. Look at what you're reading. There are actually news articles these days that start with, "This is what you should be afraid of." And I say, how dare you try to insert more fear into my life just to get me to click? We're being played. And so I want to start my day with people that still say, it is possible. There is still a piece of the American dream. It's not all going to hell in a handbasket. There's still opportunities, and I believe there are. But I want to find those people that are. I want to find those people that are positive, whether in my field or not. And I want to spend as much time with them as I can.
Well, Bill, how do you balance the rose-colored glasses, the burying your head in the sand,
Right.
the reality, like the reality of some of the things our industry is facing are real.
Right.
There are some fundamental
Absolutely.
potential changes that actually will affect people's particularly livelihood or income or the way it's done. How do you balance the optimism with the reality?
Well, I do use a cognitive behavioral approach with my clients, and that is to say that we have probably 4 or 5 big fears at any one point. We have more fears than that, but our brain can only handle 4 or 5. And I always tell people, okay, give me a number on a scale of 1 to 10, how freaked out you are by this. And then I ask a question that's a little different. You may have heard it, but it's kind of our approach. What are you telling yourself about this? Well, I'm not telling myself anything. It's the 6% change in real estate. It's this, it's that. It's how the fee structure is. Well, what am I telling myself? I'm telling myself this is life as we know it is over. Well, is there any hyperbole in that, any exaggeration? What's something that you could say that would acknowledge the reality of these potential changes in the industry, but wouldn't be so running around with your hair on fire? They begin to come up with a phrase that they can tell themselves and use and tell each other, and they have an appropriate amount of concern. It doesn't go to zero, but people can walk out of an hour or so with somebody and they can be in a very different headspace. And we know this works. We know that when we went through a breakup, had a test, and had a bully, we talked to people as a kid and they really helped us to repack. And sometimes we're going to need that a lot, just as we need an auxiliary engine in some hybrid vehicles. We're going to run out of juice, but eventually that's going to become more part of us. And we may need to start with some visuals and some writing at the beginning of each day, but eventually it's going to be in our head. Oh, I'm doing that again. I'm going to the worst case scenario. I told myself when I do this, I'm going to tell myself this. And I begin to have more of a sense of catching it before I go down that rabbit hole. I'm acknowledging what's going to happen, but surely this is not the first time in the world where there's been a potential tectonic change. And there's going to be people that benefit from that. And there's going to be people that struggle with that. How do I become a person that is nimble enough and awake enough to pivot if I need to?
I love it. And this may be an oversimplified example, but I am presenting to 150 professors of real estate next week from today. And one of my first slides is the work doesn't stop. We're still going to sell 4.5 million homes this year, and someone needs to do that work. So that's like a pattern interrupt, right? It's like, oh, the world's not going to end. Who's going to do the work? Well, someone's going to do the work. Now, how we get compensated for
that's true in my field as well. Well, that's true in my field. We look at AI and we look at that. On the clinical side, there could be some huge hits, inroads into the work that's traditionally been human to human. But there's also going to be opportunities. And I have chosen to get ahead of it and learn what I can instead of just saying, they're going to keep cutting part of my my workout. I've diversified, and that has helped me a lot.
Well, great. Well, as we wrap up, did everyone get the slide? Bill, you want to put that one, the QR code up one more time?
And the deck that I sent you has it as well. So
so everyone's going to receive a whether you're here or registered. As long as you're registered, you'll get a copy of the recording, a copy of the slides.
You'll get this.
And you'll get all of that post the meeting here. So this was really helpful for those of you.
Everyone.
For those of you who are our clients at Recruiting Insights, we thank you. For those who aren't, if you'd love to have a consult with either Ben or I and talk about what's possible for what we do. And for our clients, we've added new products and new things that you may not be aware of. So we hope to touch base and connect over the next few weeks on what's possible as we enter into the second quarter. Bill, it's hard to believe it's already we got to pay our quarterly taxes today.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And that is done. Good to say, but it sneaks up on you. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I put mine in I paid mine yesterday, so they're all good. All right. Well,
everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. I'm glad this was helpful for everyone, and we'll send out the recording. And until then, fire your excuses.